demi-heure à présenter les choses.
Mhm.
Si vous voulez le faire, vous pouvez le faire aussi, mais il n'y a pas de stress par rapport à ça.
Non, non, je pense que c'est un peu plus tard parce que je dois mettre tout ensemble et en ligne, comme ça les autres peuvent contribuer encore. Mais j'essaie d'avoir quelque chose comme ça pour partager pour soit dans la journée ou plus tard.
Va bene, va bene.
D'accord?
Noi abbiamo detto che la conferenza comincia alle 2 con Silvia e Vera. Non è avanti?
No. Siamo in the 9th we have another speech.
Yeah, because this morning
Silvia is in
Yes.
Okay, so conferences, and I think will be very, very interesting conferences this afternoon.
Mhm.
About perhaps Vera, you can repeat a little bit because I'm not sure all person was there, and they will be at 2:00. And this morning, what we give us as goal in the workshop is to transpose these ideas, this element in a panel, in one of these school elements. So start a little bit to think what will be the exhibition and how we can really do this work of pedagogy. This means also do a panel who function without comment and who has his autonomy of understanding. It's sure we cannot finish, right? It's not the idea to make something absolutely finished. It's only for the different schools, for the different leader of groups to start to have all the components in the process and to say what we have to do. And this we can then also take on the internet to present. I think this make more clear the idea we have of the goal of our exhibition. Really, the 26th of January is important also. It's a little bit more early because of Institut Français. So this idea to do these panels, I think, is a way also to organize this knowledge and not knowledge around thematic. It's a part of the thematic.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Is this clear? Yeah.
I put this also in the chat that the people who will come inside and will understand what's happening right now.
Yeah. You have this draw of the...
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, very good, very good.
Okay.
With the size and all this. Huh?
Okay.
So,
this is,
I think we will divide us again in 3 groups. If you are agree, I don't know.
Ginger,
I don't know, she told yesterday.
yeah, because we think that you can, because
You
you are lonely.
Yeah.
So, and she also, and I don't know, or we you add to the other group, or we do a group with someone online, other students, that maybe it will be better because we are a little bit dominant, so maybe it's more simple to express in a group with the students, because there are 9 students online. So you can use one room, and you illustrate this one you have done yesterday, and then we can go on this direction.
So if we have the topic of the three groups is now the methodology of conception from the base of a very simple, a little bit conventional situation of lotissement. I don't know how you say it, lotissement. Lotissement in English?
Communities, I mean, or pavillonary
This kind of basic command of a promoter, and we try to find out what's the situation mostly with the different actors around the construction of part of city like this. And we go on the sense that we take the public space within the middle of this area, and we try to represent that when you take other hierarchies, times hierarchies, intervention hierarchies, you change absolutely the way to make this conception. This, Jack, you can agree.
Thinking again a day after, I think what is important is to realize that 80%, I'm sure it's the same, 80% of people want to live in a house.
Yeah.
And this addition of house, the problem, it doesn't create this opportunity and this sense of community, which is an urgent need in the society today. That's why I think that, je passe à voix haute, that's why I think that what Rudy said, to think that the void, the interstice, the space between in this pavillonary site are urgent matter. Urgent matter, because it's to be seen everywhere. People when the houses. So you have also
houses, dogs.
Yes, exactly.
Borders.
And you can't, as you say, despise these people. Saying, we were talking about the Euro jacket yesterday, you can't say these people are just people that you want to get rid of the city. On the contrary, you say, how can we make a community and a sort of city interaction with all these isolated houses?
It's interesting because we just come back from Colombia, and the one of the, I think there are 70% of the housing is informal, so-called informal. So you have different types of informality, I would say, and in this you have formality. It's not informal, it's informal in our logic of planning, but it has an organizational form. It's just to understand how it has organized itself, because they didn't have enough material and so on. And I think what is interesting is to see this informal, I would say, egoist, individualist, pavillonist settlements, and the informal settlements because of poverty. And you have in both a lack of you have social cohesion in this informal poor settlements, which is sometimes a strong factor and a protection of these, and you have no social cohesion in this isolated.
No, it's too much.
But you have, and the question is how, which kind of public and common we have in mind, and if it's not, would be interesting to work on these two forms of urban growth, which are marking. We have to find new forms of city organization, and or don't even use the word city planning, to give those access to what we call the urban life, the urbanity. Because with their pavillonnet, they also are kind of isolated. So, yeah.
If we go to knowledge, no knowledge, I think your example is right in the center of what could exhibition be is talking about place, because what you say, I understand, Colombia, but it reminds me of, I know, La Réunion Island, where it was the same. But houses put together, there is not a fatality, but to have houses together mean no community life. I understand that in Colombia, and I remember 20 years ago in La Réunion, example, in La Cour, it was small houses put together with a very strong collective life.
Often stronger as in a block.
Exactly. Which means that we have to analyze in our final work why putting houses together, so the same roof now in advanced countries like Italy, France, European country, means that the collective inspiration, the community life disappear. So one of the guests we had yesterday is that it's the addition of rules, technical infrastructure, things that are put there together as something you can discuss, and finally make the community life disappear.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting.
What's a big difference is the process of the two situations. Is one, you take at first the territory.
Exactly.
And the other, you take at first your house. And the forces to construct the house defines your room.
Yes.
And this is absolutely different. This means you don't have interstices, or the interstices only to go at this place. And this fact to say at first you have my little domain makes that you are in isolation in the consequence now.
I think what's important is what's the collective and the common you have in mind. Because we have the idea that there's a defined public space, and if we create public space, we will have public life. And I think it's interesting to learn also from these formats that maybe it's one house in the garden of one habitant, which is a real public space because people come there on Saturday, and you can say, okay, how to interconnect or to map these resources, and saying, if I do a map, I would say this is the public place or this is the meeting place on this time. Then it's maybe the place in front of the church. So to say, how is this common functioning and which common we have in mind, and what does this common need to be the common place? And for these informal cities, the infrastructure is a central question because conflicts are coming because they don't have access to the resources. So I think access to resources, social and infrastructure and technical, is for both contexts central.
The common part.
The common, yeah.
And what was one of the strong, I think, extract of this discussion was this concept of savoir non stabilisé. The sapere non stabilisé. This means when you do something like this, you have some critters who can be very, very important, who absolutely change. When we just analyze, we speak about telephone, walking distance, the changing of the mode of walking change also these places and the presence of human in these places. Also no walk is a little bit the same, and I think this element to say we are confronted more and more on not stabilized knowledge from the point of view of economy, social, ecology, and other elements, make that we have to plan open systems who can adapt at situation, at possibility who we don't can in the moment capture. And I think this is a very important element of what we try to work, is to say we have to integrate these elements in the conception. And this is not only a point of representation. What we represent, this process, is an element of. I think it's it's very important to find out where these elements are and how can we qualify this, because going with just sapere is what happened in the moment is every person thinks they know and they go to a war
In italiano
or to I don't know, to a catastrophe.
non so se in italiano più che non stabilizzato si può dire, cioè un sapere che abbia la capacità di variare, di adattarsi alle situazioni, nel senso che non è che quando sappiamo qualcosa questo sapere, specialmente nello spazio pubblico, può variare a secondo delle condizioni che si presentano di volta in volta, quindi non assumere come cioè non sapere vuole anche dire di non assumere una cosa come definitiva, quindi dargli la possibilità di modificarsi nel tempo con la modificazione delle esigenze e delle necessità del luogo e fondamentalmente delle persone che lo abitano.
So, non sapere non c'è solamente elemento scientifico che dal processo di modernità e dire davanti non sappiamo e adesso sappiamo più e domani sappiamo anche più. Quindi questo è veramente una riduzione di questo concetto del non sapere.
Sì, perché il non sapere non è solamente una mancanza di conoscenza o tecnica o tecnologica o di qualsiasi altro tempo, è proprio il fatto che non sappiamo cioè non vogliamo sapere determinate cose che succedono e non ne teniamo conto nella nostra progettazione.
So this was the first group, and I think if some of you are interested to walk with us in the second step, this step of representation of this banner, of this you can be part of us. The second group walk about cinema, the moment of documentation, the moment of improvisation, I think, the moment of reacting of something you cannot anticipate. I think this is also non-sapere in the way that it's a moment we don't know, and we have two possibility. I make the interpretation after you can. We have and we try to control each possibilities. That's one way to do this. And the other is to say we have a kind of syntax and we make it for. We have a parameter who can adapt at things we don't know. So this is, I think, a very interesting. I like the compare of these two processes, what one and the other, because I see what you do, some critique about what we propose also. So I think bring a richness of reflection to say what is improvisation in architecture? Have we this capacity of react? And when we go back to the barrio from Vera, is very interesting because one child DQ, child more, you put one room. So is this capacity to arrange with capacity of economy, the capacity of the needs of room, and the possibility, the social possibilities. And this make a city who is very more organic, very more, I prefer it, who is not based on only on repetition. And how can we do this? And I think you speak about this cabanon in Gruissan, and we see this kind of examples who was based on a very, very simple central element who you can move around and comfort around elements.
The only thing it's a fascinating capacity of survival, and I think we can learn a lot because in confronting this crisis situation in which we are in our society, but in which we have been always, if we continue our discussion, the survival capacity, and we'll speak about this afternoon, is the moment when you put together all options you have, and then you start to improvise or you start to assemble and to work with what is accessible. And then you start to develop things. And this is fascinating because you don't do planning, you don't do potential, you work with what you have and you reassemble. And because you don't have what is maybe the best, you start to improvise and to develop new forms because you do what you have. And this is, we work with the musician Christopher Dell, this is precisely the precise principle of improvisation, that you are shredding, you are really cutting all what you have in parts, and you reassemble. And this is a very interesting technique. Both techniques have very strong elements. I think the planning has forces, and yesterday we had this opposition between technique and cultural and potential and atmosphere. I think what is interesting is to irritate. For me, this is also a resume of this resume for me of the day, the political resume of the day yesterday is that one of the interesting project of the Scuola, non-savoir, is the irritation of the hierarchy of our knowledge system, of the hierarchy, who has the definition power, why, and what does this do with our planetary and collectivity, and where it's even counterproductive for the survival of the whole planet. And this knowledge, which is also schizophrenic, because we are killing each other, why is this knowledge so dominant? And I think we have this architecture of knowledge. We have also, and this, we are in the heart of our disciplines, we have to re-irritate, to at first understand it, and then to re-irritate, to bring new criteria, to find a different hierarchy, definition hierarchy. Coming back to what's really the topic of
what you say, I think it's one, when we compare the both and come out some very interesting points, also in this wording of is how can we not only be in addition, in growing, but also in shrinking. What happens with when the children go out? Can we shrink again? How can we make concepts of apartments of life element who are this capacity to go up, but also to go down.
Upscaling and sharing. I think this
because this in the bios is absolutely not the case. It's a crushing.
The only thing, the base, and that's why I say survival. There are potentials and resources in this context, but it's the base is extreme poverty, and we have to take care not to glorify these surviving situations, which are really, and we have, this is a majority of human beings living like that and not the minority. So it's also about inequality and equality, and how to make urban design, for example, and this is your group, I think, and housing, where the resources are accessible for the most of the inhabitants and not for just a small group. But our section, well, as you said, Rudy, is I think it's the role of the camera or an instrument or a human being who is working with with a representation tool, and I think film is one format of representation, which means you have the presence and you have latence, you have a gap between the present situation and what is represented, and what role this representation can take in different situations, in the relations of human beings, in the relations of beings and objects, environments, and to understand what are the different contexts, how and in which attitude the intervention is done, and what process it lands and imposes. And I think this was where we discussed yesterday how different attitudes, different formats, how this object, because with camera, for example, you have an object which intervenes and you have a human being which intervenes. So to see all these components and what does this do with all these interrelations. And this will be, I think, the question for our map, if we maybe can find the representation.
The map is another representation, not confused.
Yeah,
So the two elements.
No.
And how could we explain, maybe with different scenarios, maybe with one. This is a little bit we should maybe work today on this question. And for me, it's the camera, it's the video camera, it's photo camera, but there can be also because you have sounds, you don't have smell, but maybe you have the smarter sense of the dimension. So until now we have more spoken about the visual aspect. You have shown us yesterday a film where also the sound played a gesture played very important. So I think it's this multi-sense. The question about the multi-sensual intervention situation and its impact.
Yeah. Perhaps the third one, Daniele, we let you a little bit present what you do yesterday and what you imagine to do more, do other.
Well, yesterday we
Also, here in English is good, I think. So we finally speak all English.
Yeah. Okay.
So disaster.
We lose our battle.
Disastro culturale latino.
Volevamo parlare tutte le lingue e non ce l'abbiamo fatta.
So yesterday we discussed about the city, and mainly we started asking ourselves.
Sentite a casa? Riuscite a sentirci?
Sì, assolutamente, molto bene.
Ok.
What is in our mind when we spoke about the city? So we started to define some criteria to talk about the city, but we ended up identifying just 5 criteria, but of course there might be more. So we just started writing down these first 5 criteria on which we could talk about the city, to then explore these 5 criteria in even more ones. So we started with the borders, the inhabitants, the identity that we
The discussion.
the discussion, and then 2 more that I actually know.
Transport.
And the mobility and the inhabitants, yeah. And yeah, this was mainly what we started to discuss, and the main idea was to the link between the path that goes to these first 5 points. It's a kind of knowing path, so the approach should be something that should be always discussed and not already known. So that's the reason why then we wanted to open to other points. But this was mainly the process, so we mainly discussed about the process and how we could also let it open to involve other participants in the discussion.
I think it's very interesting because end with three absolutely different visuality and way to transmit this. And today, it's good you come back into the group, is this point of transmission. Is how can we make a panel who bring in explication with drawing and words, this complex element of knowledge and all this, that a person who are not the codes can understand it. And this I think, and this I present a little bit these old drawers. They are very, very interesting because they look very naive, but you know about what it is. And then they explain it. So they explain in a way of sapere. But I think the mistake could be to say, because we focus on the non-savoir, we enter in something who is abstract, who you make a very good presentation here about this, what is non-savoir when we seek this visualization at all, in general. When we broke it down and say that's part of non-savoir and why, I think it's that could be interesting continuation of your diagram, is why we don't know where you take this file, and what's the difference of not knowledge at this point. And so this probably give help, but we have also to understand is a city. It's not enough to say this. So it's this very, that's a little bit communication and graphic design, but how can we really focus on the subject without breaking the complexity about what we speak, and enter in this dimension of non-savoir, and try to bring it in a representation. I'm absolutely not agree with this theory who say because we make a representation, we go from non-savoir to savoir. That's for me very too easy as arguments. That's not the point. I think the point is how can we present it in a system, in elements who are more complex. I really can, is a little bit basic, but I can do, where is the camera?
No, it's better.
And then on there.
I can.
Là, je ne vois pas très bien. Il faut juste une seconde le mettre plus proche.
C'est ce qu'on va faire.
I send you the link
Okay, perfect.
on Amazon. Yeah.
Perfect.
It's not a good example, but it's
Va bene.
È un giapponese, è molto interessante perché vieni anche da questa cultura giapponese di non parlare degli elementi ma della relazione degli elementi. E lei fa solamente un lavoro su che fai quando fa graphic design. E si vede i progetti in questo momento dove fa la concezione e dopo vede il risultato grafica. È molto interessante questo gap between the moment of what is my intention, and this he do with draw, and then he come to make a presentation who is then a little bit more classic, very beautiful, but a little bit more classic. And this gap in between both are, in each level, are very interesting, I think, to work on this pedagogical way. because this gives place of this situation we don't know.
Yeah, sure.
Without trying to say, okay, we don't know, so must be some something like in the Triennale in Milan, or must be a Nettamente supra planetary. What is just an aspect of this one.
Actually, I took a picture before. I took the wrong direction of the underground, and I was almost at the end of the outside.
I also streets this morning.
Yeah.
I returned Casa.
So I took a picture of this poster. Maybe I can show that, like, also in the file that I'm going to send to you from inside. Like the Triennale one that we had a look yesterday, unknown unknowns.
Yeah.
And the written in Italian is quello che non sappiamo di non sapere. It's like to make things easier, of course. Exactly. It's a bit rhetorical. But like what we don't know, that we don't know. So you know, actually, you institution know. But by the way, I don't know, just like
all this,
representation of this.
on this point, the critic of matter is absolutely right.
Yeah.
Because when we know what we don't know, we start to know it.
Yeah.
So,
But also this is.
we absolutely don't speak about this.
No, it's sure. But I have just found interesting also like the visuality and.
And then when we say also in the video, yes, and then when we say the
Indoor. I mean, I can share it with and I don't know if it makes sense what I'm saying, just like to understand if we are on the same page. But I was thinking, like, so like 1 month and a half ago, I think 2 months ago, I don't remember. And like I was invited to a lecture for like in relation with my job doing like graphic design for exhibitions. And what I did was like show the process of like from the concept, not revealing everything because it would be like too much, but like some views of what also was beyond
The process.
exactly. So like, okay, this was the first sketch. I mean, not really the first, because it was already digitalized, but like, and I didn't know which was the part. So also to like break this way of like, like this storytelling way that we always show or represent concepts that are not even more concept, but are already designed. So it's finished actually, and then so showing like I don't know this red thing, we like explain the process that brought us into that, but never like saying, look, that was at the beginning. That's just an idea, and it's nothing, and it's like also to, and I don't know, maybe it's also this way
I
of.
have to present you one exhibition I do any years ago. It's in quotidien visuel, and was absolutely this is how can we present a stand of the work, but no finished work, only the processes.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
No, but I think that's a little bit in this book, and what I like in this book is that he make a representation also, not only to say this was the process, but also to say when I think this was my argumentation, my ideas, so how can we make work on this step before the visualization, because the visualization, and you see it really good in these double pages. So he present 20 alternatives for a cover.
Okay.
And I think this is very more rich as a result. And I'm not sure in the result you see all this.
Yeah.
So how can we bring in visibility all this idea we have to come to something at the end look a little bit like other books or other.
I think what you are speaking about, and this is the problem, the result is a reduction.
Yeah.
It's a reduction of different possibilities of searching, of looking, and reduction has a strong element because it's you have focused reading, but it's excluding options. You spoke yesterday about, for example, this tool for urban planning, which we worked on, and tried to show parallel representations of the same states or moments, so that you see, for example, a plan or urban space on the aesthetics of the postcard, on the aesthetic of Google Earth representation, on the calligraphic mapping, and you see the same territory, but just by form and different narration you give to it, you see the same territory completely differently. And this is interesting if you have these parallel representations, you always, and I'm coming again, irritating the hierarchy of one form of representation, which is, for example, we see that Google or whatever is the most scientific one. We are trained to take this for the truth and the narrative one for the poetic expression, but not that it not has the same value. But maybe it's representing the reality much stronger than this kind of domesticated form of representation. And I think it's between this training to what we will systematize this afternoon. I think we spoke about it yesterday. Jack spoke about this, how to represent the use, for example, of the building or the program, and or dynamics or the ephemera. And the relation between the ephemera and the static elements. And I think when we want to communicate a project, then we especially we have a lack of representation formats for this. So yesterday you had the arrow, but and it was interesting. In one project we had an engineer for ecological questions, and his presentation, his drawings are always relational.
Buongiorno. Bonjour.
His drawings were always interrelational and dynamic drawings, for example. Because as an ecological engineer, he's always trained to see the impact and interrelation of so this is something we will, because we will speak about smooth factors, I will make this afternoon is precisely about this. It's necessary and how you visualize energy, energetic flows, etc. And there we go almost to scientific visualization, but I think it's for all other forms of representation.
Again, we have every time problems of syntax, grammatical, and we have problem of vocabulary. And I think when we enter in energy and this kind of element, we also don't have the vocabulary, the visual vocabulary to represent it, to say if I make a draw, so others will understand the same I draw. And this is a very interesting point also. This, what are the codes to understand something? And when we speak about the dog, it's easy, but when it's easy and not easy, because we can start to say a dog is not a dog, and that's true. The dog is in relation with a man or a woman who are proprietary and with the environment and all this, and then starts to be also complex. But when we start to speak about elements who are not visibility and not ideogram, this is surely very, we are in a more experimental way. This will be very exciting this night, this afternoon to work on this.
I think one thing, because we are the idea you brought in is to find a representation which is a map, or which is a map in the tradition that these maps or representation tell us the world. So like an encyclopedics. And I think it's interesting if you ask people, or if you ask almost everybody has has a memory. Everyone has a memory of the role of these representations, and it's interesting. Still, when you search in the internet, you search for these kind of schematic representations of a topic, and the disorientation is often that you have hundreds who are telling the story, but you also have often repetitions, and the memory of these cards were that they were stored somewhere. So you had this room which told you the world with all and I did some interviews with people who take part of the project, and what came often is that the memory is that the map was on the teacher took the map and he started to speak and to teach this very old ritual of citation, also wie sagt man, it's not storytelling, it's
also what we do when we do a conference. Yeah. The picture is a start of something we explain with not in speech.
And the brutal thing is that you have just one or how many cards, because if you have a presentation, you have hundreds, now you have 150 images. But how to make complex model or cartography to tell about one subject, one element, one aspect. And I think
there, I think we have to make an homage at a person who stayed the last days. It's not the king, this is not important, but Godard.
Yeah, I see yesterday.
This is the king of the film. And he really worked, and he speaks also about this. It's absolutely not interesting to make an illustration and to take the word of the illustration on it. How can we make this gap in between what we see and what we speak, and how can we make that what we see is complementary and not reproduction of what we and we know the graphic design that's the most, I think, important of graphic design is this relation in between the text and the images, not only the images, the relation in between text and image. And often we are in a kind of boring situation to say, I see something and then I can read it, but the beautiful process when, or explication is when we are in this gap, in this tension in between both. And this sure will be a challenge of what we read, to say what can we not say with the words and what can be the complementary of emotion, of information who give the picture. But we know also the picture bring out, and this Natalie is true, bring out some dimension of non-sapere. When you take a picture, you have affirmation, mostly. Or it's difficult to say these images can be this, or this. that's the point of, I like, often I describe this, because when we do a pictogram, we of a dog, pictogram of a dog, is not, we have the choice, it's not the dog, it's what is this middle point of dogs, and who, yeah, or we can also say we choose an extreme point, and this represents all the family of dog. But if it is too extreme, can be Spanish and not dog. So it's how can we be in this representation of possibilities with a picture? I think it's something you have it in cinema, we have it in graphic design, and we often work in this relation with word. So word gives us help to read correctly the image.
It's the same thing.
Sylvia Doré.
For those who don't know the name, everyone knows.
And I'm with Sarah.
Bonjour Sarah.
Je viens suivre en tant qu'étudiante and assistant with me and to our students in online. I think it's the same thing with the Marie, ceci ne pas une and the power of legend. You can tell what do you want about not only the description of image but of history. We see in the Musée de l'Immigration, we can do it. So what do you write about an image? It's a representation of history or not?
So it's again kind of écart, kind of tension between both. So tension can be historical, can be from the semiotic, can be from, but you have different possibilities of it.
And the most interesting thing is if you have, we try to do this in our book about orientation, desorientation. We had one image and we had 4 commentaries, and the commentaries were written on the image, so that you start to learn that the same image can represent a traumatic situation or an euphoric moment for somebody. And when you see this, you have your own lived library, you have the socialized library, and you have the transmitted, school transmitted mental library with which you match what you see in this moment. That's why learning, and that's for me is very important, not knowing is not learning, it's that we bring each other in the capacity to have different augmented libraries with which we can confront us in the with the reality which we are living. And this gives us potential to unlearn, because if with a radical presence you are going behind what you know, because you say, and there we are really in Chinese thinking, and again this will be the topic this afternoon, this is radical presence. You are always, if you come in this classical form of dance, you bringing yourself away from presence. And presence is this moment to say, I'm in the spirit of a beginner, but with all knowledge I have accumulated so far. And the cross readings are possible if you're augmenting your library.
And what we try to do in this book, I think it's really a good example. Yesterday we speak about question with another strategy of open, to say we don't affirm, we take a question, a picture, and the question makes the person walk on something. It's not only accepting what is on the wall. But what we try, and I think what was probably also a little bit complex, but is to say these 4 persons who write, don't write in the same way way, some like citation, so you was also free of your way to write. So you take in confrontation, ideological position, a citation, and poetry. And this open the perception.
I'm sorry. No. It's a new topic, so maybe.
Okay, it was just one little remark since we are in design and the strategy of branding was precisely to get rid of this multiplicity of interpretations. So it was branding to reduce the message to one always possible to repeat message. And this is it's a very violent act because you have
primacy of
and this is a very violent act to give a message which avoids other types of reading. It's the contrary of poetry, for example. It's
so reduction of diversity in one area. That's a flag. The flag is we reduce all the Italian in one side. Also the contrast of and we exclude who is not Italian.
So this is a very manipulative and violent act, but beside this you have also this act of an author who doesn't want to be misunderstood in the sense of, for example, political statement or transmission of a sensitive content or whatever, and how to find between branding and between a clear position taking the format which still let open these other associations, but which is still a very clear position taking. And I'm just giving one example.
Just don't repeat.
I mean, I'm interested maybe to even to
Well,
answer.
it's not so complex. So the point of branding is strategy of appartenance. Is to say this is mine. Also, when you do a branding of a university, is to say this expression, this research is mine. So mine is the institution. And the other is absolutely different. It's work on the expression of something, and you don't need repetition of it.
Why I'm saying that one of the sensitive and about also the maps we are doing is the maps we have shown, for example, and which take part of our expose of this project are racist maps. You have a representation of human beings, one of these maps, and the representation of the black people is a racist representation. And I think, for example, we working a lot on this discussion of a decolonial form of representing the human being in projects. It's not easy to not step back to stereotypes that you make an African clothes or whatever to speak about population. So how to find forms of representation which have a clear political statement, but which are not clothing the discussion. I think it's just one very important topic, because we know also instrumentalizations of representation. This is Gramsci, who was used for fascist Austrian politician. It's the military, Israeli military, who uses the Foucault and the situationist way of sinking the city for develop arms. Is it possible to avoid a reading which was made as a contra reading, for example, to complete different readings?
This is not always the picture, it's the meaning. That needs picture to make appropriation in another goal. Do it with philosophy and without have picture.
Das ist strong element of film.
Was in Deutsch da.
Yeah, yeah.
Quickly do something. Ich finde, es gibt eine Repräsentation dort erzielen.
Please, because I want.
Es gibt aber, ich finde, es gibt einen Unterschied, wenn man eine Karte an der Wand sieht und der Schüler es bewerten kann, dann ist es für ihn schon so deutlich, dass es eine Wertung ist und dass dieses Werk kolonialistisch ist. Ich glaube, das ist für jeden, der kritisch denkt, unmittelbar erkennbar. Ich glaube, dass wir heutzutage viel mehr Systeme haben, die viel schwieriger zu dekodieren sind. Da kann ich ein Beispiel machen. Ich habe für das Fernsehen gearbeitet, für den G8-Gipfel, also für das Ministertreffen. Und es gab eine Veränderung in der Verarbeitung des Materials. Früher war es so, dass man, wenn man gedreht hat als Kameramann, man mit einem Autor zusammen die Situation bewertet hat. Mittlerweile ist es so, dass das ganze Material auf einen Server gelangt und jeder Journalist, der in der Position ist, egal wo auf der Welt, kann sich dieses Archivs bedienen. Und das ist so eine Verschiebung der Wirklichkeit. Ich habe noch, oh, wir haben total Lust.
I introduce in resume form, but you can then you can critique. But I think the phenomenon about what you are speaking is that we have